Chapter 34. Pong had never imagined that the first time he set foot on the west side of Chitana, it would be under arrest. The police officer who'd picked them up on the river, a man named Winya with a round belly and a thin mustache, had marched them through the quiet, jasmine-lined walkways with hardly a word. The same was not true for Samkit. He jabbered on, asking again and again to speak with some other officer, a man named Manit. Pong wished his friend would shut up. Surely they'd meet every police officer they'd ever want to see once they got to the station. But to Pong's surprise, they weren't taken to a police station at all, but to some sort of stable. Officer Winya slid open the stable door and a sour whiff of hay billowed out of the dusty building. Barred stalls lined the walls and a wide aisle ran down the center. The stalls were all empty and scrubbed clean, though the strong odor of animals meant they must have been in use not long ago. "So, you see, sir," said Samkit in a voice sweet as palm sugar, "we were just testing that taxi out so we could fix the motor. Ask Officer Manit. He'll vouch for me." Winya grunted and swung open a stall door. He motioned with his thumb for the boys to file inside. "I told you, he's busy," he grumbled. "The governor called a big meeting for all the senior officers. I'm not gonna go disturb him just because some street rat wants me to. When he gets out, he can come deal with you." Winya swung the door shut and locked it. "Then we'll see who's telling the truth." "Oh, I assure you, officer," said Samkit, "I always tell the absolute—" "Knock it off," snapped Winya. "Manit might be an old softy when it comes to you hoodlums, but I know better. You're lucky I brought you here and not straight to the jail. If I hear one peep out of you," he held up the keys and jangled them in Samkit's face, "I'll be locking you up where you really belong." He stomped back down the aisle, hung the keys on a peg on the wall, and went out. The stable door slid shut behind him. "Now what are we going to do?" whispered Pong. "Relax," said Samkit. "Once Manit gets here, I'll talk to him and everything will be fine." "A senior police officer?" asked Pong. "That doesn't sound fine to me." "Manit's different. I know him and he's a good guy. Trust me, he'll do the right thing and let us go." Pong couldn't imagine this, but his friend sounded so sure. Samkit began pacing the stall, practicing what he'd say to Manit when he came. "So, as you can see, we didn't steal the taxi. It's an old junker, and we were just—" While Samkit paced, Pong looked around the stable. There were no orbs inside, just the dim moonlight shining in through the slatted windows near the ceiling. It felt like a long time since Pong had been in a room with no orb light at all. The shadows seemed richer here, as if they were made of more colors. As his eyes tracked the room, he realized that the shadows across the aisle held a deeper shadow, one that moved ever so slightly. He held still and watched. The dark shape shifted slowly. 2 black eyes glimmered at him, unblinking, like an owl's. Pong's breath snagged in his throat. He'd know those eyes anywhere. Nightmares of Nok had haunted him ever since he had escaped her in Tanaburi. Most days he'd woken up in a sweat, unable to shake the image of her towering over him, dragging him back to prison. And now, finally, here she was. Pong waited for the same wave of panic that had plagued his dreams, but instead he felt a strange numbness. Maybe he'd known all along that she'd catch him eventually. Slowly, he stepped up to the bars of his stall. Nok must have known he was looking at her, but she kept her head tucked under her arm, like a pigeon using its wing to shelter from the rain. Finally, she lifted her head again, and the moonlight hit her face. Pong took a step back. Had he made a mistake? Was that really Nok? Shadows pooled under her eyes. She stared at him flatly, as though she didn't know or care who he was. She couldn't look more different from that confident, defiant girl he'd last seen on the cliff's edge. The girl sitting slumped over a few yards away looked like the most miserable creature he'd ever seen. That should have been satisfying. Instead, an uncomfortable feeling wormed its way between Pong's ribs. And now he realized that Nok wasn't just watching him from the shadows. His first thought at seeing her was that she was there to gloat over his arrest. Why else would she be there? But curiously, she sat on the floor of a stall just like theirs, also locked behind a door. Somkit had noticed her too. He stepped up beside Pong, just as confused. "What's going on? Do you know that person?" "That," whispered Pong, "is Nak Sivapan." Somkit gasped. "Sivapan? As in the warden's kid? As in the one who's been chasing you? But why the heck is she locked up in here?" That was Pong's question exactly. It made no sense. "What are you doing here?" Pong asked her directly. "Don't these guys know who your father is?" Nak's eyes shut and opened again slowly. "They know who I am," she rasped in a voice that sounded shredded and wobbly from crying. She sat with her left arm cradled gingerly against her stomach. Pong noticed a dark crust of blood stuck to her cheek that trailed from a gash on her temple. "Hey, who did that to you?" "Will you knock it off with the small talk?" hissed Somkit, suddenly frantic. He pulled Pong close and whispered, "We've got bigger problems. With her in here, we'll never be able to talk our way out of this. She'll tell Manit who you are, and then he'll have no choice but to take you in. We've got to get out of here." Somkit gripped the bars of the stall door in both fists. His arms trembled as he twisted and pulled. The wooden bars creaked, but didn't budge. Pong snapped out of his numb state. Somkit was right. He wouldn't just sit and wait to be taken away, especially not with Nok there to watch. He rattled the stall door, testing the strength of the hinges. They'd never break it open. He reached through the bars and felt the lock with his fingers. "Have you got anything we could pick this with?" Somkit made a sour face and shook his head. Not even a snip of wire. He mashed his forehead to the bars, scanning the stable. "Hey!" He pulled Pong close to him. "See that stick? We could use it to try to get the keys." Nok's staff stood propped against the door of the stall next to them. The police must have taken it away from her. Pong glanced at Nok. He didn't want her to see what they were doing, but the girl was lying down on her side, one arm tucked under her chest. She wasn't even looking at him anymore. "Okay, let's hurry," he whispered. Pong's neck scraped against the wooden bars as he jammed his shoulder between them, groping for the staff. His finger brushed against bamboo. The staff wobbled back and forth and then fell toward him. Somkit caught it inches before it clattered to the ground. "Phew," he whispered. Nok still didn't stir. The boys slid the staff under their stall door. Pong picked it up and stuck it out between the bars, angling for the peg on the wall. "Here, you hold the end so I don't drop it," he told Somkit. Together, the boys aimed the staff at the ring of keys hanging on the peg. It took a few tries, but finally Pong was able to use the staff to flip the keys off the wall. They landed on the floor with a soft jangle. "You did it," whispered Somkit. "Now use the stick to drag them to us." But before Pong could do anything, the front door swung open and the light from the porch orb flooded inside. "All right, boys," said Officer Winya as he stepped into the stable. "The meeting's almost over and—" Winya stopped mid-stride and stared at the boys. His eyes traveled down the length of the staff to the keys on the floor. "Hey, what's going on here?" Pong yanked the staff back inside the stall with him. Somkit hid it behind his back as if Winya wouldn't notice a 5-foot-long bamboo pole sticking up in the air. Winya snarled and picked up the keys. "I knew it," he said as he walked toward their stall. "You street rats are coming with me." Pong's pulse throbbed in his jaw as he watched Winya unlock their stall door and step inside. Somkit held Nok's staff out in front of him. Don't come any closer!" Winya narrowed his eyes. "Oh, crap," muttered Somkit. The officer growled and rushed at him. "Oh, crap!" Somkit swung the staff out with miraculous timing. Winya ran straight into it, groin first. "Oof!" The officer doubled over, clutching himself. Somkit whacked the staff over Winya's back, sending him to the ground. He looked at Pong, his face almost as shocked as Winya's. "Now what?" Pong scooped up the keys from where Winya had dropped them. The guard rolled onto his side, moaning. "Come on!" Pong pulled Somkit by the arm out of the stall and swung the door shut behind him. He quickly fumbled with the keys until he got the right one and twisted it, locking Winya inside. "Let's go, let's go, let's go," called Somkit, dropping the staff and running for the stable door. Pong ran after him a few steps, then looked back over his shoulder. Nok lay on the floor of her stall with her face pressed to the bars. Pong expected to feel a surge of hatred for her. This was his moment to get even. She was locked up, and he was free, and she deserved every bit of it. Nok looked up at him with flat, resigned eyes. Pong knew that look. It was hopelessness. The space behind his ribcage flared with that old familiar heat. "Ignore it," he told himself. "Ignore it and run." But even as he thought these words, his feet were turning his body around and taking him back to Nok's stall. "Hey," cried Somkit, "what are you doing?" Pong stopped in front of Nok's door. He glanced at Winya, who puffed for breath as he struggled to get his feet under him. Pong's hands shook as he tried a key in the lock. "Tweet!" Winya's whistle trilled. "Tweet, tweet!" "Pong!" called Somkit, stomping his feet like a toddler. "We have to go!" Nok sat up and held on to the stall bars. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Getting you out," said Pong, trying another key and failing. Nok blinked. "Why?" "Tweet, tweet!" Winya blew the whistle over and over. Outside, Pong could hear men's voices shouting and boots pounding. Click! The last key on the chain opened the lock, and Nok swung out of the cell, tumbling onto the ground at Pong's feet. Somkit hurried back to Pong and grabbed his arm. "We are going now!" It was too late. 4 men in uniforms of the governor's guard filed in through the stable door. "Grab them!" gasped Winya, pointing to Pong and Somkit. Pong still clutched the keys in his hand, searching frantically for some way to escape. No good. There was only one door. "You kids," shouted a guard. "Hands on your heads! You're under arrest!" Pong dropped the keys. He'd ruined their only chance to get away. Nok swiped her staff from the ground and stepped forward, standing between Pong and the guards. She stared at Pong strangely, as though she couldn't get her eyes to focus on him. "Hold on to something," she said quietly. Pong and Somkit both grabbed onto each other before realizing that wasn't what she meant. They let go and gripped the stall bars on either side of them. One of the guards pointed to Nok. "You there! Put the staff down! You're coming with us!" Nok stood with her feet planted wide, holding her staff in front of her with both hands. The posture was the same as that day she faced Pong on the cliff's edge, but this was a very different girl. Her hair stuck out in all directions. Her breath came fast and irregular. She looked wild and dangerous, like a wounded creature. The armed guards exchanged wary looks. The first guard took a cautious step forward. Nok twisted her shoulders as though winding her body up. She took one deep inhale through her mouth and held the staff up high. Ha! She brought the end of it down hard onto the stable floor. Pong shut his eyes. Silence smothered the room. A hard pulse of air blasted over him, rippling through his clothes. The ground shook like an earthquake. He heard men's voices crying out, their words muffled by the intense pressure in his head. His ears popped, and he opened his eyes. Somkit still clutched the stall bars. What the heck? All 4 guards lay on their backs on the floor, twitching like fish in the bottom of a boat. Somkit suddenly leaped to life and grabbed Pong and Nok by their wrists. "If we stay in this bar one more minute, I'm going to kill both of you. Let's go!"